In 2008, the people of St. Luke Lutheran Church and Niantic Community Church began a partnership with the people of Chachaguala Honduras. Pastor Steve Schmidt and Jess Bunger led our group of 30 in this mission work. We express muchas gracias to the Episcopal Diocese of Honduras, represented by Eliana, for the preparations that made our trip successful. When we arrived at the airport, we were greeted by a bus, tossed our suitcases on top of the bus, crammed our bodies into the bus, grabbing every seat and creating a few extras as well. We arrived at our hotel, which was very simple, but provided a clean shower and a clean bed, enough to get the grime off of us at the end of a busy day. We ate together in a common area, which was wonderful to spend this time socializing. And for breakfast, we had two choices: eggs with salsa or pancakes, or dinner we had fish or chicken. Our mission work took us to the northern coast of Honduras. We stayed in the town of Amoa, but our work was in Chachaguala, which is a mountainside village. The northern coast of Honduras was absolutely beautiful, as were the rugged, very steeply cut mountains. Chachaguala was a mountainside village, as I mentioned, with hundreds of paths that go off to houses. Some were stucco, some were lucky enough to be concrete block, but many of them were corrugated steel. Many things were not as we're used to seeing them. Electricity was one of those things, as well as many conveniences as washing. And cooking was outside. And every day you needed to go to the corn mill. There was one in the village, and grind up what you needed to make your tortillas. When we arrived in Chachaguala, the very first thing we did was a church service, which was wonderful to meet the community. And we had Leslie as our translator, and Pastor Steve was able to participate in the service as well.
One of the first projects that we helped with was replacing the roof on the church. They were going to raise it 3 concrete blocks to increase the ventilation. The amazing part was they did it completely without tools. Most of it was done by hand. The only power tool they used was a welder.
Another one of our goals was to paint 2 of the classrooms. We were going to paint the classrooms that were most frequently used. When we got in there, it was just like we didn't even know where to begin. It was unlike any other project we'd ever started, but we grabbed the brushes, we grabbed the buckets and buckets of blue paint and just started to paint. But at the end of the week, we actually had accomplished so much that we were able to paint nearly the entire school and the principal's office as well. Everyone got involved, from the kids to the adults, and everyone took pride in it. Another one of our goals was to build and paint 50 desks for the classroom. And we didn't even imagine that that would go as quickly as it did. But we all chipped in, we're sanding, we're painting, we're assembling, and before you knew it, the whole project was finished. Another one of the goals was to build a retaining wall way above the sanctuary. Look on the right, that's how far down the sanctuary was. But block by block, we hauled the components of that wall up that very, very steep, slippery hill. It was amazing to watch the kids and the adults who were helping us side by side with our workers just scamper up that slippery slope. Every bucket of sand had to be run through the sifter and then hauled up that hill to make the cement at the top of the hill.
This was Valentine, who carried buckets of sand up that hill for us for the entire 4 days we were working on that hill. It was a frustrating job because some days were sunny and some days it poured rain. The electricity would come and go with no warning for some of our tools, but we managed to get the entire wall constructed. It was a challenging task because the block, the materials were not up to what we would consider normal standards.
This was one of those projects where the kids could be working side by side with us in partnership with some of the expert carpenters that we were lucky enough to have on our crew.
And when the last block finally went in, we had a good sturdy wall that would keep the rainwaters during the rainy season from rushing into the church with the new roof. And we even had enough time and materials left over to build some stairs for the village.
Another one of our goals was to paint an apartment which was attached to the sanctuary in preparation for a future pastor who could assist Padre Francisco in his work with the 7 to 12 churches that he supports. And it was fascinating to have all the kids from the village there to help us. Our very first day happened to be a day where the kids were out of school, and so we had lots and lots of helpers. We had lots of expert people on our crew who could think of things that might be needed in that apartment and fill in the gaps, so to speak. We had some expert musicians on hand, too.
As we prepared materials for the Vacation Bible School here in the States, it was difficult to know what to expect when we arrived in Honduras. But in the end, our broken Spanish was completely overshadowed by all the smiles and love that we shared with those children on those exhausting and amazing afternoons.
One thing that we quickly learned was they loved to collect. And somehow, like the fishes and the loaves, even though we didn't really have enough supplies for everyone, they seemed to be content with whatever they had.
Maybe it was being out of my element, or maybe it was the heat. But whatever it was a blessed gift to share that time with those precious children, because it changed me. It was in the hallways of that school that much of the theology that I have so long believed in actually came back to life for me. Before that trip, some of my spark for truly sharing God's love with others had started to fade. But those afternoons were a vivid way to see that it is when we give ourselves away that we can feel the closest to God. God's love is meant to be shared often and without self-control. Chachaguala brought that back to life for me.
Pastor Steve worked very closely with Padre Francisco to coordinate the needs of his village of Chachaguala, which is just one of 7 to 12 parishes he supports. Padre Francisco is a wonderful man with a heart of gold. We were also lucky to be able to provide medical assistance to some of the people in the village, as we had a medical doctor on our crew.
Our first introduction to Chachaguala was when our bus arrived in the town at night. The town was dark, having few streetlights, and the first light we saw was the bright interior of a church where we attended a nighttime service. I was reminded of a verse from Isaiah, "And the people who have walked in darkness shall see a great light." That church became a symbol of our transformation over the next week. The roof was removed the next morning, and the sanctuary exposed to the elements, while the walls were built higher and a new roof added. In a similar way, we were challenged to take a new look at ourselves and grow through our experience in Chachaguala. I learned in personal ways how God's grace is present in places where there is little material wealth, and how I often let material wealth obscure knowledge of God's presence